Did you say sexy Jesus?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we had pictures of Jesus, posters that they would make, and Jesus was always cut and ripped. And you had to, whether you were sexually playing with somebody else or yourself, you had to fantasize about Jesus.
Welcome back to Other People's Lives. I'm Joe Santagato.
I'm Greg Dybec.
For anyone out there that wants to be a guest on our show, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us at our website, oplshow.com, or just send an email directly at oplpodcast@gmail.com.
And if you want to become a patron, head over to patreon.com/OPL show. You'll get weekly behind the scenes bonus episodes, and you'll be part of our Helping Other People initiative, where each month we take a portion of the Patreon funds and give it to a different charity or different charitable venture. So you can check that out at patreon.com/OPL show. So today we are speaking with a woman named Christina Babin. She is a survivor of the controversial religious cult Children of God. She actually spent most of her childhood being raised in the cult, and we're going to learn her story of growing up under these very specific circumstances and how she was eventually able to break free as an adult and the impact that it's had on her life up to today. So, Christina, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, totally. So I think to kick it off, can you just talk about how you initially became a member of the Children of God cult and how old you are?
Yeah, so I was never a member by choice. I was basically born into it. I was a baby when my mother had joined in the late, early 70s. And my older brother and I were already born. And the cult took us in, and uh, they changed our names, hid us from our family, and whisked us overseas. And yeah, that's how it all started. During that time in the 1960s, when the cult started, it was a very turbulent time in U.S. history. There was a lot of rebellion against society. There was a lot of uh, dissatisfied youth, people that were upset about the war. They were uh, unhappy with our, I don't know, I guess our democratic system. They were, just dissatisfied with corruption and uh, the pursuit of the American quote unquote happiness. And they wanted a richer, fuller life that had less to do with materialism. And where there was a lot of young people that were very spiritual or wanted to be. They wanted something not so shallow. And, there were a bunch of young people that fell into drugs and alcohol and sex. And then there was a certain percentage that fell prey to cults. And my mom was one of those people. She saw this very idyllic lifestyle that included, simplicity and happiness and sharing. And they were communists, were very much into living communally and believed in spirituality and sharing. And to her, it looked like a great way to escape America and escape, the ideals that the world around her was pushing on her, and raise her children in a pure, wonderful environment.
So, can you talk about, the general beliefs, structure, and like the teachings of this cult?
Yes, I will. And so all cults, they kind of tout a certain doctrine in the beginning, but what you're going to see is that it changes drastically. But in the beginning, the cult had a doctrine. David Berg was the founder, and he was a failed minister in the Christian faith. And he touted a very uh, traditional Christian kind of morality and spiritualism. He believed in Jesus and salvation. He also believed in a very apocalyptic future, and taught that the world was going to end, especially the US. And, a lot of people in those days were raised going to church and hearing these stories about the apocalypse. And so it wasn't all that foreign or crazy to them. He kind of took it to a new level, but that's kind of where it started. And then every 10 years, the doctrine would 5 to 10 years, the doctrine would change. So it went from a traditional Christian group to all the way to where we believed in aliens and heaven was in the moon, and we had to make love to sexy Jesus. And so it went from here, where our parents joined, all the way to insanity, just slowly.
Did you say sexy Jesus?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we had pictures of Jesus, posters that they would make, and Jesus was always cut and ripped, and you had to, whether you were sexually playing with somebody else or yourself, you had to fantasize about Jesus. Yes.
So that was like one of the requirements?
It was one of the doctrines.
Okay. So I am curious because, if you're familiar, like a lot of people probably are, you think of cults like, I guess, infamous ones like Heaven's Gate or like the Branch Davidians. Like, I know in some cases sex plays a role, and then in some cases sex is forbidden in a sense. And I know we'll get deeper into this later on, but it seems like the kind of ethos of this cult, sex was a part of it, and in this case, fantasizing about sexy Jesus, as you put it,
among other things. So the I guess the cocktail that most cults have, they always include sex and the control of sex, be it the restriction of it or the encouragement of it to to extreme extents. The Children of God cult actually started very pure and puritanical. Sex was not allowed, hand-holding was not allowed, marriages were arranged. My mom was actually part of that, where they, put 5 women and 5 men in a room and said, okay, one of these people you have to marry. But what all cults have in common is sexual exploitation from above. So even if they restrict sexuality, Heaven's Gate is actually the rare one where even the leader did not engage in sex because he was not comfortable with being gay. So the Children of God, it started out very much like all the other cults, where everybody was denied the pleasures of the flesh except for the founder. And he had his little, his little harem going on. But what happened with this cult is, once they moved overseas, it became doctrine and it became part of us, and we embraced, and we're told we had to embrace being a sex cult. But it wasn't what it was founded on. It wasn't what everybody joined, but everybody was in different countries. They were in too deep. They had already given up their lives, their money. They'd given up their families. They hadn't spoken to them. They cut all ties with the US, and they're stuck in these other countries. And it's like the boiling of the frog. Have you heard that story?
No.
If you take a frog and you stick him in a hot pot of boiling water, he's going to jump out. He's going to know that he's dying. But if you take a frog and you put him in cold water and you slowly turn the heat up, he will stay in that water until he is dead. And that is what happens with cult members. You don't join a sex cult. You join a self-help group that is saving the world. And then it slowly turns into a sex cult. And then you can't get out.
So how old were you when, these things started happening where, you're in this from a young age, obviously, so you're probably not super aware of what's going on. But at what age can you remember that you started questioning or noticing that it was getting to be a sex cult?
Well, unfortunately, kind of from the beginning, from what I can remember, because I was born in 1974. So by that time, they had already started implementing a lot of these policies, which they started out with swinging, and then they went to where our mothers were actually trafficked and told they had to be prostitutes. And then it went on to even worse things than that. But the founder would write to everybody. He was in seclusion, and he would put out these letters that were mandatory to read. And so he was already pushing these doctrines to all of us. And our culture at that time didn't really have a culture for children because it was a bunch of hippie parents, and we would go busking on the streets. We didn't do school. We were just living, making money, and working as children. And so the philosophy was just kind of part of our everyday life. You know, we would read the founder's sex fantasies, his exploits with other women, his wife's exploits. It was very much part of it when I was growing up. Now, eventually that changed when there became, I guess society really started like taking notice. And so they did clean up their act. Now the act is cleaned up, and some of the younger kids did not know what was going on. But the time that I was in it was the sexual revolution. So always part of it for me.
Wow. Well, with that being said, was there a time, like, were you young enough where this felt normal for a period of time and it just felt like the only way to live, the right way to live? And I guess, was there ever a moment where you were happy in this structure?
No, no. I didn't like it. I was very dissatisfied with the cult, but I also didn't know that there was another way that we could live. I did believe that we were persecuted, that the world could end, that we needed to be on the run. I had never seen traditional families or traditional marriages. I did not grow up with the concept of romance or uh, relationships or boyfriends or girlfriends. So all of that was it was just normal. You know, it wasn't, a lot of people think like, oh, if that happened to me as a child, it would be very shocking and traumatic. But for me, it wasn't. It was kind of a slow boil though, because I didn't like what was going on around me, and I didn't like the messages that I was being taught. But what I did was I internalized it, and I thought, okay, there is something wrong with me, that I don't like this philosophy. I don't like what's going on. And it created a lot of self-doubt. But there was, as I got older, I started to really notice that a lot of the adults were also unhappy with the philosophy and unhappy with our lifestyle, but everybody was too scared to leave.
Yeah. And, I think a big part of this, and it's totally up to you, how much detail you want to go in, but one of the most shocking things, just even doing some general research on your story and this cult, is it seemed like this sex cult culture did not exclude children at a certain point, and children were actually, brought into the mix of sex acts and things like that. Are you able to go into any detail about that?
Definitely. So I want to kind of give a precursor to that. There were phases that the cult went through. So us older ones experienced the worst of it. Whereas, most families had between 8 to 14 children each. So the younger ones, the policies changed once the world started taking notice. So there were different phases that happened. So when I was growing up, I saw the orgies and the sexual sharing, which was like the wife swapping and all of that. And then I remembered them coming out with the forcing our moms to be prostitutes, and they would pressure them. They would publicly humiliate them if they didn't. Some of them did it just to escape living in the commune and getting to go out into the world. It was very complicated. And but it was trafficking. They didn't really have a choice. They were pressured. But so once David Berg got everybody in that deep, then he continued with his sexual philosophy. He was always trying to push the limits of whatever people did. And this is very common in cults and high control groups. You're always pushing the limits of people. You're always moving it forward. You're always turning that water up. I love this book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. by Robert Lifton. He talks about thought reform, and a lot of these tactics are done to control people. So imagine you're in this group and you're being told, like, you are a prostitute, look what you did, now you're a whore for Jesus. Well, imagine the humiliation of these women being convinced that that's what they were. Their children were seeing it, their husbands were seeing it, the world was talking about it. So they don't feel like they can leave. They're not sure, they don't think they're victims. So once he does that, you're in deep. So then he added, not only were they not going to protect the children from it, he started encouraging the children to be part of it. And they had like sharing schedules, and they would put us on the schedule where adults were kind of taught to awaken our sexuality. And Father David believed that children's sexuality should be awakened as early as possible, because that is what happened to him. He was abused by his nanny. And so instead of him dealing with the grief and the shame that he endured, he internalized that and turned it around to, it's actually good and we should do this to other people. So he himself was an admitted pedophile. And a lot of people have the misconception about the Children of God that it was a pedophilic group. It was not. Like I said, people joined for really good reasons, but they got trapped in a cult, and a lot of people did things they did not want to do. There's a lot of mind control and thought reform going on that is so much more complex than what we truly understand. And people can get backed into corners and do things that they themselves don't want to do or wouldn't agree with. And so a lot of that was going on. And that went on till I was about 13 years old when things started to shift and they started changing some of the rules.
Just to, just backpedal a little bit, like when you're saying this guy believed that sexuality in children should be awakened like as early as possible, like how early, like how old
babies
were the
Yeah, so they put out the story of Davidito, which was his adopted son. When the whole sexual revolution started happening within the cult, and Father David, well, we call him Father David or David Berg, he had many names. Berg, I'm going to try to stick with that name. He got a revelation from God that the women needed to show the ultimate of God's love to people outside of the cult. It wasn't strictly the women, it was men could be included in that, but all of the propaganda always showed women, and he talked about women doing it. And so the ultimate sacrifice and ultimate way to prove your love to God was to go give your bodies to outsiders to show them that God loved them. And
how are these outsiders like sort of chosen? Or just random people, or?
Yeah, so he would send the women out to bars and hotels. Wealthy and influential men were targeted, especially because they could give financially. And it was just anybody who was open to having sex with them. They would preach to them and have sex and then get money or benefits.
Would the money go back to the organization and the cult? Like, was this kind of a way to fund operations, essentially?
Oh, 100%. They're all pyramid schemes so that the leader benefits financially, sexually, and power-wise. So we were the classic pyramid scheme. So us children, instead of going to school, we had to beg on the streets. Our moms had to be prostitutes. Nobody was allowed to work. And let me correct that. Our moms were not prostitutes. Our moms were being trafficked. Mm-hmm. They were being forced. I saw women crying, not wanting to do it, and leadership trying to pressure them and force them to do it. So I just want to make that clear. This was not empowered women, empowered in their sexuality, doing what they wanted to do and be sex workers. This was not the case.
Yeah.
So I kind of forgot where I was going with that.
The pyramid scheme aspect. But.
Yeah. So we had to we had to go on the street and peddle tapes or posters that the cult had made. Well, we had to send 15% of the money that we made directly to the top. And then with the rest of the money, we paid our rent, and then we had to buy more posters and tapes from them to then go and sell.
And you're not going to school or anything at this time. Your life is literally working on the street and then just learning the doctrine.
So some of us worked on the street, some of us stayed home and took care of the many, many children. Contraceptives were not allowed. So yeah, and a lot of indoctrination. We were not allowed to watch television. We were not allowed to read books. We were not allowed to listen to the radio. We were not allowed to have outside friends. We were not allowed to talk to the neighbors. We were not allowed to eat normal food that other people ate. We weren't allowed to purchase food. We had to have everything donated. The rabbit hole goes very deep on the control was intense, down to how many pieces of toilet paper you used a day. You had to literally confess every night. You had to write reports. They call them open heart reports. And you had to tattle on yourself or others. And they would use that information against you. It was extreme control. But again, this is not necessarily how it all started. It de-evolved into this ultimate control. And once you are controlled that much, even if you're unhappy, which I was, it's very, very difficult to understand how you could leave. You're not educated. You don't really know how the world works. You have no connections with the outside world. The only people that, when I was growing up, the only people that were outsiders that were allowed inside of a commune were Johns. The little old neighbors didn't come over and bake cookies for you. Right. You know, the only people I ever saw coming into the commune were Johns, and anybody else who came in was a security risk.
So, also you were saying, you know, like I'm trying to, like, you know, picture this even in was there some sort of misogyny with this as well? Like, did men have it better than the women in this commune?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. It seems to be the case a lot. There were women in places of power, but it was a very sexist environment, in that the men made the ultimate decisions. The women were the ones that were having to have the babies, and they had to be yielded to the men. So it was your very, I almost want to say typical Pentecostal type of, you know, the women had to be subjugated to the men.
Right.
And at what age did they start, like, forcing women or girls to engage in sex with people?
So everybody has, so let me explain. This country was in 80 different countries around the world, this cult. 80 different countries around the world. Between 10,000, we always had like around 10,000 members. Over 100,000 people move through this cult. So there's lots of different people, lots of different countries. The control was intense, but every country and every commune was slightly different. So I can speak to my experiences, but the survivors from Brazil may have had it a little differently. So right. When I'm telling you my story, that's not necessarily exactly how it happened with other people. I mostly saw older children being put on the sharing schedules. That kind of stuff started happening to me like around 11.
What is a sharing schedule exactly? I don't know if we define that.
The sharing schedule, so traditional families and traditional relationships were discouraged. Parents were called your flesh dad or your flesh mom. It was meant as like kind of a degrading, you know, the whole cult was our family. Everybody, all the adults were aunties and uncles. So brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, that was kind of like not a thing. Everybody was one. So Father David or David Berg did not like traditional marriage. He did not like people being romantically involved and dedicated to each other. So they made sharing schedules so that the women would have to have sex with all these different men. So you're in a commune, and tonight you're with Uncle John, and then tomorrow you're with Uncle Fred, and then you're with your husband on this night, and then you're, you know, so everybody was like scheduled so that it was mixed around. And so then they started, after the the founders started saying, well, it's okay for children to have sex, they started putting some of the children onto these schedules. Now, it was in my...
To have sex with adults?
Adults would, yes, they would like teach you how to have sex. Wow. And that was, and in my experience, most of the adults did not like doing it, just like I didn't like doing it, which was, in my case, was kind of a relief, because I thought there was something wrong with me, that I wasn't spiritual enough, that I wasn't in love with God enough, that my heart wasn't right because I didn't like it. And in some of those intimate experiences, I got to see the adults or the uncles not enjoying it. And what I mean, like, their body was shut down, not enjoying it. But they were still trying to do it because that's what they thought God wanted them to do. And the stakes in this cult were high. Like, it's really hard for us to understand, out here in the world, to comprehend, like, how could somebody do that? Mm-hmm. But you have been convinced that the world is ending, that we are all going to die, that we are all going to be martyrs. This leader, David Berg, was God's voice. If God comes out of the sky and tells you to do something, most people are like, well, God said to do it. I mean, maybe we don't do that, but people all over the world have done horrible things in the name of God. Mm-hmm. And it is possible to convince people to do terrible things. And that's, to me, this is more than a story about children that have been abused. This is about, if you control somebody's environment and all of the information that comes in and out of their life, there is so much control that you have over their mind and their actions. And that we need to pay attention to this. Like, when I'm telling you, this was not a pedophilic church. This was not, a sexual empowerment. These were people that were good-hearted and wanted to change the world, mm-hmm. and then de-evolved into these mindless zombies doing whatever the founder wanted. And so we've seen this before. We've looked at Mussolini. We've looked at Hitler. Stalin. What Stalin did and made his people do to his very own people is horrific. So this is not new. This is something that has been happening. And guess what? We're still seeing this stuff happening. NXIVM just happened. So I think it's going to be more difficult for these groups to form and to stay so isolated, but it is still possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Wow. It's, so I guess as you continue to grow up in this environment, you just said something powerful, which was going through the scheduling, being forced to have sex with adults for your own sexual awakening and to learn and understand that, but not enjoying it. But you said that your first thought is, well, then something must be wrong with me, or, God's unhappy, or I'm not, I don't love God enough. So to be at that point in your life, where does it switch? Where do you begin to kind of cultivate a mindset of, well, maybe this isn't right, or maybe this isn't for me? When did that begin to happen for you?
So here's this is one of the things a lot of people, having never been in one of these situations, it's hard to comprehend. You think that the first time you're dissatisfied or that you're unhappy, that you're going to have this massive awakening and you're going to turn around and you're going to walk out the door. Well, it doesn't happen like that. With so much mind control or thought reform, whatever you want to call it, it takes about an equal amount of time to work your way through that. So around 11, I was like, yeah, I'm not digging this. I carried on kind of continuing to be dissatisfied with my life and dissatisfied with what was happening, but not knowing that there was another option. I think the biggest turning point for me was when they made camps. So they realized that most of us teenagers were dissatisfied. We were thirsty for worldliness. I would go out, and if I found a magazine, I'd rip pages out and go to the bathroom and read them and then flush them down the toilet. Like I was thirsty for the world. And no amount of indoctrination seemed to be doing the trick. So they created camps around the world to send us teenagers to. And the first camps were pretty mild. They were like your basic, find Jesus church camps, maybe a little more extreme, but still within the realm of comprehension. When that didn't work, they made extreme camps in which they publicly beat us. They put you on extreme calisthenics. They would isolate people. You had to wear signs on your face and signs that said, "Don't speak to me." You'd had to be on silence restriction. They would lock kids up in isolation. And these weren't kids that did anything wrong. These were kids that had doubts, or they just simply wanted to go live with their families. My best friend wanted to go live with her family. And that was another piece of the puzzle that we didn't talk about. When we were 12, they shipped us all off. So then we were just trafficked from commune to commune and moved constantly and did not live with our parents. And at least this was my experience in Asia. So different parts of the world, different families were a little different, but overall, most of us spent time being trafficked. And so some of these young people just simply wanted to go live with their parents. And that was considered a gateway to demon possession. So it was that time in the Philippines. We had a huge compound, and there were hundreds of us living there. And I watched what they did to my brother was there with me, and what they did to my friends and what I had to endure there. And I realized, we had armed guards from the Philippine military guarding the compound with machine guns. Only the Johns were coming in or going out. And they were just cruel. And it was at that point that I was like, I know the world is my enemy, but these people also might be my enemy. And something in me kind of broke. And I don't know if it broke. I don't know if you can call it that. But I became extremely disillusioned with the cult. And I became determined after that to find a way to get out. Now,
at what age did you make this sort of this revelation?
I was 16. But
so okay, you can continue.
Yeah, but so we had many cautionary tales of kids that have left. We were told we would be, murdered or killed. We would be prostitutes. We would be drug addicts. Funny that they thought prostitution for the outside world was terrible, but in the group it was okay.
Yeah, it sounds like it was the path that you're on anyway.
Yeah, so they were like, all these horrible things are going to happen to you. And, having been a kid on the street begging for money, I had bad things happen to me. I had seen cruelty from the outside world. We were not as protected, as they were telling us we were, so I had seen the cruelty of the world as well. And I was like, yeah, it's not really a safe place out here. I was singing in bars when I was 12 years old, 11, 12 with my stepdad to make money for the communes. So I'd seen the world, I knew that it wasn't good. But after the camps in the Philippines, I was like, there has to be a way, there has to be something. But it wasn't until I was 21 and I actually found a safe place to land that I left. But until then, I was just biding my time. And had I not found a safe place out in the world, then I don't think I would have left. I was waiting for it to feel safe.
Were you having conversations with some of the people around you saying this isn't right, or were you just keeping it all to yourself?
Yeah, no. So you never, ever spoke your doubts to anyone. That's how you got locked up. You did not share any doubts, any disagreements. Doubting was basically the worst crime that you could commit. So you never shared. When I left I was around 21. I already had 2 children. I thought that I was the only one that left the cult. I didn't know that we were leaving in droves and that hundreds and hundreds of us were leaving. I had no idea. I had no idea that any of the other kids ever wanted to leave. I just thought, well, they would tell us the crazy ones were the ones that would leave. They were mentally unstable or demon possessed. So like if a friend of mine left, I wouldn't know because we didn't really communicate. All your mail was read, so you couldn't write down your thoughts or disagreements. And if you did, that's you'd be incriminating yourself because everything was read. They would go through your stuff. Every time you moved communes, and then in between they would go through your stuff and look for anything that was from the world, any letters, any notes that you wrote.
It's crazy, just the scale of an organization like this. It's nuts. The people that you essentially have to even employ to keep this running across the world.
Yeah, and the scale of this cult is it's pretty crazy because we've heard a lot about cults. And they're becoming more and more popular. Just the information,
Right.
People are looking into them more. It's pretty interesting that this cult, the Children of God, was the most successful cult in modern history. They are still around to this day. Now, granted, it's in a more passive capacity. They've gone to online or something, but they are literally still free. Yeah. They are still free to do what they want. They still have all the money that we made them over the years. But this conspiracy and this group was massive. We had our own world. They made videos and books for us to read. We had a legal structure set up within the group. We had our own laws. We had our own impactful world. It impacted our lives in every possible way. And it was extremely structured and extremely disciplined and extremely secretive. So in the early 90s, different countries around the world started taking notice and raiding our communes and taking the children away and, trying to see, is this going on? What's happening? Well, they would find the children seemed calm, denied abuse, so then they would have to send the kids back. What the world did not know is that we were highly trained. So you know how in the military they send people to boot camp? You send people to boot camp to train them. And it's not just to get them physically fit, it's to get them mentally prepared to handle stress, right? So you're being acclimated to somebody waking you up in the middle of the night screaming at you, and you got to jump up, get your gear on, and get out, right? So you're being acclimated to stress. So they did that to us. We were acclimated to stress. We did fake drills where the outsiders would raid the communes. So the uncles would dress up in all black and they would break in. They would arrest us. They would interrogate us. We had fake court cases where they would ask us all these questions and we had to practice how to respond. They also
really mocked up all the real world scenarios. That's crazy.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing. And then just in our day-to-day lives, we had to constantly smile and be happy. If you were frowning or crying, that was you yielding to the devil. So we learned to suppress all emotions except for this smile and this like, oh yes, everything's fine. We were good at that. And so this has never been seen in modern history. And we maybe could even say beyond that, but I don't know. But I know in modern history, there has never been this level of training and this level of child abuse on such a massive scale that has gone unpunished. And one of the reasons you're probably going to ask is like, how do they get away with it? How are you not finding your accusers? We didn't know anybody's legal names. We were trafficked constantly. We didn't know our addresses. So we can't say like, oh, I lived in this house from this time and this was, Matt Johnson.
Even the leader himself, David Berg, were there ever any consequences for him for the whole organization?
No, Interpol actually, they were trying to catch him for quite a few years. The top leadership, they all had fake IDs and they would change their passports and their names from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
So they were, and when you move constantly and you have no footprints, and by that I mean we had shell corporations, we had certain people would go and open communes and then change their names. So you might not, the person who rented the commune or the house might not be somebody who lived there. Our parents were all made to sign affidavits giving us to, I don't know who, I don't remember. I remember seeing the affidavit because the leaders told me, your parents signed this. Oh, you're signed over to us, but I don't know the person whose name was on it. I wouldn't have known because I didn't know their legal name anyway, because he was Uncle Johnny one month, and then if you saw him in a different commune, his name was Uncle Solomon. So they were constantly changing everybody's names.
I actually wanted to ask, at that time where, you're sort of dealing with this, you're 16 years old and, you end up ultimately leaving. Can you talk about that process also? Just, how you brought yourself and how you planned it. You said you had a place to go, and then how do you kind of assimilate back into reality, essentially, with no school or job or work experience or any of that?
Yeah. So, acclimating to a completely new world.
Right.
I like to tell people it wasn't like being a foreigner coming to a foreign country. It was like being an alien coming to Earth. Because all the things that were normal in society were deemed wrong, evil. We didn't experience them. Our culture was so vastly different. It's like being in the upside down world that we grew up in, where, family love and structure was not good, where relationships and romance were disgusting and wrong and selfish, where you were not allowed to have any kind of self-love or self-pride. So coming out into the world, it's been a journey. So at 16, that was like my first really, I was just like, these people could be my enemy also. This is dangerous. I'm not safe. So after that, I really just kind of started doing reconnaissance. I started sneaking as much outside information as I could. I started writing letters to people and coding stuff and trying to see how much could I get away with? How could I send letters or receive them without them being read? So I just doing a lot of those kind of things and pushing the boundaries a little more. I ended up getting sent back to the US. And they had a media home, which was set up to be a fake commune. And we would invite the media to it. So I was part of that commune where we would invite the local media. NBC came, which is kind of crazy because when I did a show with NBC recently, they actually pulled up old footage of me and they were like, "Is this you?" I was like, "Yeah, that's me."
Nuts.
Yeah, it was nuts. But in that footage, I was standing up for the cult and saying, "Yeah, everything is great." And but it takes a while before you can actually speak your truth.
We're just gonna say, what's fascinating to us is the fact that you're talking about this now in retrospect, so clearly with such clear understanding, it seems now, of what was right, what was wrong, and you're able to bring yourself to get out. But what is that like? I'm assuming that process takes years. One thing I always hear in relation to cults or if people get out is deprogramming or something to reverse thought reform or brainwashing, whatever people want to call it. Is that something that you kind of had to go through for yourself, and how do you accomplish that?
You do, yeah. And there are people out there. Steve Hassan is somebody who he does some deprogramming with people, but you can also just do it yourself. And what's funny is that the story sounds like maybe that a lot of us can't relate to it, but we all can, because we've all been in toxic groups, whether it's a toxic relationship or a toxic friend group or a church
work environments, or
right.
there's
And
so
when
many
you
cases.
Exactly. And so when you leave these groups, you have to challenge your thoughts and challenge what you're thinking. And that takes time. And so really the first few years of getting out, I really just was like learning how to be a person, and it was a lot of experimentation. I remember the first time I left the house alone, because we were never allowed to be alone or allowed to um, go out alone. You always had to have somebody supervising you. So well, I guess we'll back up a little bit. My ex-husband, he was actually looking at joining the cult, and he had gone through the 6-month training when he met me, and he had decided that it wasn't for him. uh of course you're not given all the information when you join, so he was fed a bunch of lies and he was tricked, and which everybody who joins is. You are not told, oh, you're joining a sex cult and guess here's what we do. But he noticed the amount of control and was not comfortable with it. So it took him 2 years to talk me into leaving. And he finally took me to his parents' house, and they said, you guys can stay here with us. And I was shocked. I was like, what do you mean? And they lived out in the country in White Castle, out in Louisiana, and in the middle of the sugarcane fields in an old plantation home. And it just felt so safe. And I was like, I just couldn't believe it. So I did. We left, and I had already had 2 children. And I remember the first day that my ex had taken the kids to the grocery store. Nobody was home, and I was home alone. And I could not remember a time I was ever alone. And this was like a few weeks after leaving the cult. And I had been learning how to drive. I was 21. I had never even imagined that I could drive a car. Like, it was just not, like, women didn't drive in the cult. It wasn't strictly forbidden. It just wasn't done, and nobody was going to teach you. And, you had a lot of babies to have, and, women were kept too busy for driving, and that was the man's job. So I had been learning how to drive. I was home alone, and I just was like, it felt so weird. I was just alone, and I didn't know what to do with myself. And it felt wrong, but I decided, like, okay, this feels wrong, but I'm going to go with it. I can do something. And I looked out the window and I saw the car, and I was like, I can go for a drive. That's what people do, right? They go for a drive. So I got the keys, and I remember I had on a pair of jean shorts, which I had never owned before. And I was like, I thought I was so feisty because I had these jean shorts, and I had bought like a week before some red lipstick, and I had that on, and I got in the car and I turned the car on and I put the radio on, which was completely forbidden, but I was free now. So I put the radio on, and it was some American rock and roll song. I still to this day don't know who it was. It was just American rock and roll. And I rolled the windows down and I started driving, and the dirt road, the dirt was like billowing up on the sides, and the sugarcane was really high, and I'm driving, and I just felt like such a badass. I felt so free. And I had just learned to drive, so I was like, oh, check your speed. You got to look down and check your speed. And I looked down, and I was going like 25 miles an hour. And I was like, okay, maybe not such a badass. But as I kept driving, it hit me all of a sudden that I could keep driving. I was like, I don't have to stop. I don't have to come back. I can drive and keep driving and never come back. And I know that might sound terrible to people. I had 2 kids waiting for me back, but it wasn't me leaving them that I was thinking. I was just thinking, like, there was no fear that something terrible was going to happen to me. It just dawned on me that I had freedom to drive and keep driving, and nobody was going to come after me or stop me. And I felt so happy.
Yeah.
Just to have the possibility of being able to, just drive, like you said, something I think that everyone sort of like takes for granted, or just knowing that, you could really do whatever you want. You could drive this car as long as it will, as long as it doesn't break down.
And
So that
just
must be
simple
a very,
pleasures, the simple pleasures that you don't, that you
Yeah,
didn't
it's a
get.
beautiful thing. And I think a lot of times we don't, if you've always had freedom, it's hard to understand, but just being able to walk outside of my house, to leave my front door whenever I want and go to the store or go on a walk, it's like that hasn't gotten old
Yeah.
for me yet. And but yeah, I mean, these are tears of happiness. It's good to be free. It's a beautiful thing. But it's a journey. It took a long time for me to get to where I am today. And there's a misconception of, when you leave a destructive group or an abusive relationship, that once you're free, everything is better. And the truth is, recovery takes a long, long time. It's not something that happens overnight. And just because we help somebody get free, or you broke up with that abusive girl or a man, or you got out of a cult and now everything's better, it's not. It's a long, long journey of self-discovery and deprogramming and finding out, who am I? Because you get reduced to a non-human. You're not a person. And so you really have to, for somebody who did grow up healthy and then gets caught up in one of these groups, you have to find your inner child again. You have to find the person you were before you were in one of these groups or these relationships. For people like us who were never allowed to be children or people, it is even harder because you don't have those memories to go back on. You don't remember opening birthday presents and getting to choose what toy you liked. You don't know what you want or what you like or don't like. So it's not impossible, but it's a little bit of a long road. You have to really discover yourself. And the other thing too, there's a misconception about sexual trauma, and that people who have been through sexual trauma, that now you're ruined. You're never going to enjoy sex. You're never going to enjoy human touch. And there's a lot of societal shame and a dismissal of people who have been through these things. And the truth is, you can recover. You can have a healthy sex life. You can, have human contact. It's something that you have to work through. But these misconceptions that you are ruined now for life and that people need to look at us with pity or shame. No, we're very strong people. Pity and shame is not what we need. It's not what we deserve. And we are not ruined for life. And you don't have to look away in shame, which is why I'm happy you guys are doing this kind of stuff, because I think the media for a long time has controlled the narrative, and they have such a short amount of time to make a lot of money. So it's all about sob story and either wrap it up nicely or leave it tragic. What people like you are doing is you are allowing the full story to be told, and we are basically becoming humanized instead of just being this tragic story. And I know, watching you guys' show and many other ones, there's a lot of us out there that have not grown up with these privileged, magical lives. There's a lot of people that have been through trauma. There's a lot of people that have had alternative lifestyles, and it's good for us all to face it finally and realize oh yeah, we're all humans, we're all on a journey, and there is hope.
Absolutely. I think so perfectly said. And, thank you for those kind words. And that is the very small part that we try to play in all of this by even just offering the platform. But it's, speaking with people like yourself, and, just at the end, you just wrap that up so perfectly. And you're just kind of taking the questions out of our mouth before we could even ask it in a great way, just to, show where you've gotten. And, one of my questions was going to be, why are you choosing to not just leave this all in the past and move on, but to make this an active part of your life and talk about it? But you've answered that question just with everything that you just said, honestly, because, I hope you recognize your ability to be able to make this accessible to people, tell this story, this full journey, and then the process that it takes isn't, it, like you said, it's never as clean as the media wants to make a story. These things take time, and I'm sure you're still progressing and working on yourself every day. But, just to put it in the words that you did, to help anyone in similar situations, and it doesn't have to be exactly this situation. It doesn't have to be a cult. And like you said, for Joe and myself, the biggest eye-opener for us doing this show from the amount of outreach that we get is, yeah, like what you think is normal isn't normal. Like we're fed that it's normal, but it is, like you said, so many people have a different version of that, an alternative lifestyle, an upbringing, serious trauma that they've gone through. And I just think, what you said to kind of wrap this up, just we'll speak to so many people in different circumstances. And, overall, we just thank you for that, for revisiting this, for telling the story. And, the other final tidbit is just that reminder to not take the simple things for granted. And I think that is important for everyone, no matter what, but really, really powerful. And, we can't thank you enough for bringing us along on that wild ride of a journey, but, a very hopeful one in the end.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said there, but we condensed it.
We did. And that's the reality of it too. But, I think this was really great. And, again, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so
guys.
much. And just to piggyback off of what he was saying, like, even what you were saying about, offering the platform and feeling like, we're doing a service here to humanize, like that has been like the goal. Is really like awesome to hear you say that. So thank you so much for that. And again, the show is nothing without people who are willing to, kind of tell us their story and their experiences. So as always, we appreciate you, coming on and talking to us.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being a judgment-free host.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Have a good one. Nothing gives me more anxiety than traveling to a country where I don't know the language. Last time I went to Italy, it sounded like I was about to throw up every time I was trying to order food or pronounce wine. But thankfully, there's Babbel, which is the #1 selling language learning app. Babbel's amazing because it teaches you language skills that you can actually use in the real world, like greetings, menus, directions, the things that are actually useful when you travel to a new place. And their 15-minute lessons make it perfect for on the go, and the teaching method has been scientifically proven to be successful. You can choose from 14 different languages, including Spanish, French, Italian, and German. And right now, when you purchase a 3-month Babbel subscription, you get an additional 3 months for free, completely free. So that's 6 months for the price of 3. Just go to Babbel.com, that's Babbel.com, and use the promo code OPL. That's Babbel, Babbel.com, code OPL, and that's 3 months plus another 3 for free. So 6 months for the price of 3. Get on that. Honestly, I truly can't think of a worse way to spend a day than going to a car dealership, which isn't cool because sometimes you just need to buy a new car, but nobody likes that dealership experience where you deal with pushy salesmen and you have to play this back and forth game and you're getting terrible deals, and it's so frustrating and it can take up so much time out of your busy schedule. But that's why there is Vroom. And with Vroom, you can buy a car online and literally have it delivered straight to you. So you never have to go to a dealership again. You get to browse their thousands of cars all in one place from the comfort of your home, the park, literally wherever you have your phone with you, you can browse their cars. Plus, if you ever want to sell your car on Vroom, you'll get a price instantly. So another reason that you don't have to go into a dealership and, let's be real, probably get a terrible deal for your car. Vroom is entirely online, so the next time you need to buy a car, just grab your phone, head over to vroom.com, that is VROOM, vroom.com, and check out the thousands of great cars that they have. If you're a busy guy, then you don't always want to have to think about what to wear every single day. And that's why you should embrace Mack Weldon's Daily Wear System, which is a selection of clothes rooted in smart design and made with performance fabrics. So personally, I love Mack Weldon. As a guy, it's always been so hard for me to find that perfect t-shirt that's breathable, nicely tailored, and actually looks good for a bunch of different occasions. And luckily with Mack Weldon, I found exactly what I was looking for. I also wear their underwear, which is super comfortable. It's great for working out and lounging. And best of all, having their clothes in my rotation as a staple saves me time from having to decide what to wear each day, since they make it easy to dress for work, leisure, and play, which is super important. So buy yourself some time with the Mack Weldon Daily Wear System. And for 20% off your first order, visit mackweldon.com/OPL and enter code OPL. That's mackweldon.com/OPL and then enter the promo code OPL for 20% off. Mack Weldon, radically efficient wardrobing.
All right, well, that was, a wild story. I mean, it's hard to even like imagine these things going on. Like it's one of the, I guess, benefits of doing the show is being able to like talk to people with such a wild story that is even like hard to comprehend. Like I feel like if platforms like this didn't exist, then people wouldn't really hear about it, at least in the detail that you did. Like obviously it is like sensationalized in certain like movies or like, whatever, but to hear firsthand a story about this, like, it's kind of wild. And also to have the wherewithal at 16 to kind of feel like this isn't right, and then making the decision, which is like extremely brave, to be like, I'm fucking out of here.
That's what's nuts when you think about, how much just being raised in any environment has an effect on you. And to be in those circumstances and still eventually be able to break out of that is amazing. Ultimately, for her to become a voice, for others, which is great. But it's crazy, man. I mean, I know that was a long episode, so we don't want to keep this crazy long. But it's just when you hear cult stories like this, they're all so similar in the, I think, important sense of it really can happen to anyone. And I do believe that. Like, I don't think these aren't stupid people necessarily. Yeah. Like when you look at the history of these things, like she said, no one's signing up for mass suicide or a sex cult or something. It's like, and a lot of these people are, smart, educated people. It's just when you get sucked up in something or with a leader that has the ability to compel and, begin to control you and your thoughts, it's crazy. It's fascinating. It's scary. In this case, I mean, I want to dive into a ton of research now because, let's be real, we're fascinated with cults. But the scale of this operation and just the fact she lost her entire childhood to these rules and some sex-crazed maniac essentially is just wow. You can't
wild,
assume
man.
Anyone's upbringing. That's for sure.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's one of those things that like it can only really exist when, when you're super young. And then I love the frog like analogy because that's such a true thing. I mean, I don't know if that's actually true with frogs, probably, but like I'm taking her word for it. But like I love the analogy in that you get into something, then eventually it becomes something like, wait, what is going on here? And by that time, it's sort of too late. It's slowly introduced to make it feel like normal, and it's just wild how
think
far,
of how
like,
many
some
people just stay
that.
in a situation anyway if it's a job they don't like, a relationship that they don't like it's to change, to leave is so hard once you've been conditioned or have a certain routine, and this is just the ultimate version of that. It's so I can see that as it progresses, as little layers are added of, ooh, this seems extreme. It's you kind of test the waters yourself, and it's hard to get out.
Seems like impossible to me because like she had no information, no outside anything. Like, it's sort of a miracle that she was able to do something like this. So, yeah. I mean, it takes a really strong and strong-willed person to pull something off like that. But as I said earlier, for anyone out there that wants to be a guest on the show, definitely reach out to us, oplshow.com, or send us an email directly at oplpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, become a patron at patreon.com/OPL show. If you want those weekly bonus episodes, you help support the show and you get to be part of our monthly charity initiative. And guys, the holidays are getting close. If you need a gift for yourself or someone else, head over to paythepricegame.com. Joe and I created a trivia party game. If you don't know, check it out there and use the code OPL for 15% off.
Yep, and that is all. See you guys next time.